Another way to find the directions would be during the middle of the day, when the shadow is at the istiwa period. You know that it's pointing north, so you just align yourself to face in the west. You would face east with varying degrees of south depending on where you are, and then you would face the qibla. وترك الكلام وترك الأفعال الكثيرة. Leaving speech, with the exception of the prayer's utterances. So another condition of the prayer is that you leave all speech. And then also avoiding excessive and unnecessary movements. ترك الأفعال الكثيرة. And this is defined as if doing so much movement that if a person were to look at you, they would not think that you're in a state of prayer. So if a person is just moving around unnecessarily, if it's a little bit, it's considered disliked, but it does not invalidate the prayer. If it becomes excessive, then it would invalidate the prayer. And again, that definition would be that if a person were to look at them, they would not think that they're in prayer. The author mentioned the covering of the nakedness as being one of the conditions of the prayer. Now he mentions what exactly is the definition of the nakedness for the man and for the woman. وعورة الرجل ما بين السرة إلى الركبة والمرأة كلها عورة ما عدا الوجه والكفين. The nakedness of a man is from just below the navel to just above his knees. This is the awrah of the man that has to be covered during the prayer and as well as outside of the prayer if there's other people around. When he says just below the navel, that means immediately below the navel, right where the navel stops. That's where the nakedness begins. It's not an inch or a centimeter below the navel. It's right below what is commonly called the belly button. So it would be right below that would begin the nakedness, and it goes to right above the knees. And it's not an inch or a centimeter above the knees. It's right where the knees begin. That's the awrah. So that has to be covered during the prayer. وَالْمَرْأَةُ كُلُّهَا عَوْرَةٌ مَا عَدَى الْوَجْهِ وَالْكَفَّيْنِ. As for the woman, all of her body is nakedness, with the exception of the face and the hands. So during the prayer, she has to cover everything but her face and her hands. And the same goes for if she's going to be in the presence of non-related males other than her husband. She would have to cover everything except for her face and her hands, and she would even cover those if she fears that people would that by leaving those things uncovered, it would attract attention of men. وتكره الصلاة في السراويل إلا إذا كان فوقها شيء. He says it is reprehensible to pray in pants unless there is something over them. So for a man, it is reprehensible to pray in pants unless it's something over them. And what it means over them means in a linear direction above them, and that means a shirt. So what he's saying here, the hukum, is that it's a makruh, even though the awrah, the nakedness that has to be covered for the validity of the prayer is what's between the navel and the knees. A person should wear a shirt to cover his chest, do something to cover his chest and his shoulders. So technically a man could pray bare-chested, but it is extremely disliked. So he's saying here it is reprehensible to pray in pants unless there is something over them, meaning something above them, a shoulder cloth to put over the shoulders and cover the chest, or a shirt. So it's makruh for a man to pray bare-chested. Whereas praying in pants, if it's regular pants, it is not makruh as long as they're loose. If they're so tight to where they define the actual awrah, they define the nakedness, then it's makruh for a man or a woman to pray in them. Now for a man, it's makruh for him to pray in them, and also if they're so tight to wear them in public around people other than his spouse. And for a woman, if she goes out of her house in pants that are defining the nakedness, they're defining the awrah, her legs, that would be haram. So even if she wears pants that are baggy, she has to wear a shirt that would come down at least to her knees, or something that would come down to below her knees. The best thing would be to wear something that covers all the way down to her legs. But if she can't wear merely pants to go out of the house, even if they're loose. But if she were to pray in them, she should put something over that. And if she's going to go out of her house, she should also go cover that. ومن تنجس ثوبه ولم يجد ثوبا غيره ولم يجد ماء يغسله به أو لم يكن عنده ما يلبس حتى يغسله وخاف خروج الوقت صلى بنجاسته. If anyone's clothes are soiled by impurity, and he has no other garment, nor can he find water to purify it, or another garment to wear while his is being washed, and he fears that the time of the prayer will pass, then he should pray with the soiled garment. So if a person has najasa on their clothes, and they don't have water to clean them, or they don't have another pair of clothes, or if they do use water, or if they do try to find another pair of clothes, they're going to lose the prayer time, then they go ahead and pray with that impurity on their body. So they wouldn't totally leave the prayer. And some people do this. You ask them, why aren't you praying? And they'll say, oh, I have impurities on my body. So you have to tell them, well, you either have to remove those things, and if it's out of your ability to remove them, then you go ahead and pray with those impurities. There's no condition where the prayer would, the obligation of the prayer would drop from you. And one of the scholars said that the prayer would not, the obligation of the prayer would not be removed, even if a person was drowning. So even if a person was drowning, he would have to pray the prayer in however he is able to in those last few minutes before he dies. So even in that state, a person would still have to pray. So if a person is not in that dire state, then he has no excuse to be leaving the prayer. ولا يحل تأخير الصلاة لعدم الطهارة ومن فعل ذلك فقد عصى ربه. It is not permissible to delay the prayer from its proper time due to lack of water. Indeed, anyone who does that has disobeyed his Lord. ومن لم يجد ما يستر به عورته صلى عريانا. If someone cannot find what veils his nakedness, he should pray naked. So if a person is forced to become to be naked, for example, if they're in a prison and they're forced to be naked, or they don't have anything to cover their nakedness with, then they go ahead and they pray naked. ومن أخطأ القبلة أعاد في الوقت وكل إعادة في الوقت فهي فضيلة وكل ما تعاد منه الصلاة في الوقت فلا تعاد منه الفائتة والنافلة. If someone makes a mistake regarding the direction of the qibla, he should repeat the prayer if time still remains. The repetition of the prayer in its time is a virtuous act. So if somebody tried to find out which direction was the qibla and decided that the qibla was in a certain direction, prayed and completed his prayer, and did not realize that he made a mistake in the qibla until after the prayer, then his prayer is correct, but he should repeat the prayer if there's still time. If the time of that prayer has gone out, then there's no need to repeat it. وَكُلُّ مَا تُعَادُ مِنْهُ الصَّلَاةُ فِي الْوَقْتِ فَلَا تُعَادُ مِنْهُ الْفَائِتَةُ وَالنَّافِلَةُ. So the repetition of his prayer after, if there's still time and after he has completed his prayer, would be considered a fadila. So where it says he should repeat his prayer, it means that it's recommended for him to repeat his prayer. And every time, وَكُلُّ مَا تُعَادُ مِنْهُ الصَّلَاةِ, every prayer that's repeated in its time, فَلَا تُعَادُ مِنْهُ الْفَائِتَةُ وَالنَّافِلَةُ. He should then, he would not repeat a prayer whose time has gone out, or a nafila prayer. So wherever it says in this text or another text that he should repeat the prayer if there's still time, then a person would know that that repetition is not an obligation, rather it is only recommended. And also, once the prayer time has gone out, then it's no longer recommended for him to repeat that prayer. And also, a person would not repeat a nafila prayer. If he had prayed a nafila prayer and made a mistake in the qibla and then realized it afterwards, then he would not repeat it, even if there was, he would not repeat it. The prayer that we're talking about that he would repeat is an obligatory prayer that he realized a mistake after he had prayed. فصل في فرائض الصلاة. فرائض الصلاة نية الصلاة المعينة وتكبيرة الإحرام والقيام لها والفاتحة. The obligations of the prayer are intention for a given prayer. So when a person stands for prayer, they have an intention in their heart, and it is disliked to verbalize the intention, so it's in their heart. They realize that they are praying this specific prayer, either dhuhr or asr or maghrib or whatever prayer it may be. And there's no need to specify the number of rak'ahs. If they say dhuhr, then they don't have to say dhuhr and 4 rak'ahs, and that I'm doing it in its time, qada, ada. They just realize that they're in the time and it's time for prayer. They realize they're praying dhuhr. So that's the intention for the given prayer. And it should be done right before the takbir of ihram, right before the opening takbir. The second obligation is the takbiratul ihram, which is the opening takbir, and that's saying Allahu Akbar. And it has to be in that particular formula. Anything else would not work. Saying Allahu A'zam, Allah is greater, in another formula, or saying it in a language other than Arabic. If a person is not able to say it in that specific way, Allahu Akbar, then he does it to the best of his ability. And the third obligation, وَالْقِيَامُ لَهَا, is standing while saying it. So a person has to be standing up, fully erect, when he says Allahu Akbar. And then the next obligation is the Fatiha. So the recitation of the Fatiha is an obligation. The Fatiha in its entirety. So since the Fatiha is an obligation, it's an obligation for every Muslim to memorize it and study it with a person that knows how to properly teach it. So then they have to memorize at least, that's what's an obligation to memorize from the Quran, the Fatiha, so that they can perform their prayers. If a person is new to Islam, or he's just now made tawbah and come back to performing, practicing his Islam, he was already a Muslim, but he does not know the Fatiha, what he does is he has to read it or pray behind somebody. If he cannot memorize it before the prayer time goes out, then he would find somebody that has already memorized it and pray behind them. If he cannot do that, then he would read it from a piece of paper. And if he cannot do that, if he cannot read pray behind somebody, or study it himself, or read it from a piece of paper until he memorizes it, then the obligation of the Fatiha is removed from him. وَالْقِيَامُ لَهَا وَالرُّكُوعُ وَالرَّفْعُ مِنْهُ وَالسُّجُودُ عَلَى الْجَبْهَةِ وَالرَّفْعُ مِنْهُ. Also, standing while saying it. So the Fatiha is an obligation, and standing upright is an obligation. Standing upright while reciting the Fatiha is also an obligation. Bowing or ruku' is an obligation. And the definition of the ruku' is that your back is bent and the palms of your hand are on your knees. And then rising from it. Another obligation is rising from the ruku'. So a person would not be able to go into ruku', into the bowing position, and then go immediately into the prostration without having risen from the bowing. So you have to rise from the bowing. Also, prostration upon the forehead. Upon the middle of the forehead is best, but any portion would do. That's an obligation. Rising from each prostration is also an obligation. والاعتدال والطمأنينة والترتيب بين فرائضها والسلام وجلوسه الذي يقارنه وشرط النية مقارنتها لتكبيرة الإحرام. Also, standing erect is an obligation of the prayer. So standing upright, proper composure at points of stillness, or the طمأنينة. So at all the points of obligation, the person has to maintain that position until his limbs become still, and then he can move on. So when he goes into ruku', he goes and he stays there for a time until all his body becomes still, and then he moves on to the next obligation. Whereas if he just goes into ruku' and then bounces off, and then goes to rise, he has not fulfilled that obligation. So he goes into ruku', stays for a few moments until his body is still, and then rises. And then in the prostration the same, and then coming up from the prostration. So at all points of the prayer, he has proper composure, and becomes still. Also, the proper order regarding the obligations. All the obligations that were mentioned have to be performed in their proper order. So a person cannot perform the Fatiha and then the prostration and then the takbiratul ihram, then the opening takbir. He has to do them in the order that it was mentioned. And then the first salam of ending the prayer, at the end of the prayer, when a person says Assalamu alaikum, that's the obligation. The completion of Assalamu alaikum, some scholars say wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, that's not the obligatory salam. The obligatory salam is saying Assalamu alaikum. Once a person says Assalamu alaikum, he has now left the prayer. So that saying of Assalamu alaikum in that particular way is considered an obligation of the prayer. Also, sitting during the final salam. So a person, when he says Assalamu alaikum, he has to be seated and he has to be still. if a person says Assalamu alaikum and he's getting up from the seated position, or he's not fully seated, then he has not said the salam while seated. So a person has to say the salam, Assalamu alaikum, while seated. وشرط النية مقارنتها لتكبيرة الإحرام. The condition of the intention is that it be made at the time of the opening takbir. So he now mentions that the intention that is an obligation of the prayer has to be done right before the takbirat of ihram. A person cannot do it a few minutes or a few hours before the prayer and then stand up and just say Allahu Akbar without realizing what they're doing. They have to make the intention that this is dhuhr, or this is whatever prayer it is that they are praying, and then say Allahu Akbar. وسننها الإقامة والسورة التي بعد الفاتحة والقيام لها والسر فيما يسر فيه والجهر فيما يجهر فيه. The sunnahs of the prayer are the iqamah, so saying the iqamah before the prayer, and that is saying Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salati, Hayya ala al-falah, قد قامت الصلاة, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. That is the iqamah, and it's to be said before the prayer. If a person leaves it, they have done something disliked, but it does not affect the validity of the prayer. If people are praying in a congregation, then it's a sunnah kifaya, it's a collective sunnah. As long as one person does it, the rest do not have to do it, and it would be done out loud. If a man is by himself, then he would do it silently, and it's sunnah. If a woman is by herself, she would do it silently to herself, and for her it's considered recommended or mustahab. Also, the surah that's after the Fatiha is a sunnah, and that's even if it's one ayah or a portion of the ayah, as long as the ayah that's in the idea that is in the ayah is expressed. So if a person reads one or two ayahs, they fulfill the sunnah of reading a surah after the Fatiha, and it's recommended for them to complete the surah. Standing for it, meaning reciting the surah while standing, and then reciting silently where appropriate. So in Dhuhr and Asr, a person would recite silently for Fatiha and the surah. That would be sunnah. And then reciting out loud where appropriate. So in the Subh prayer, in the Maghrib and the Isha, during the recitation of the entire Subh for both the Fatiha and the Surah, and the first two of Maghrib and Isha, the recitation out loud would be considered a Sunnah. So each Fatiha, the recitation would be Sunnah. So the recitation of the Surah actually has three Sunnahs, and that would be the actual the recitation of the Surah, standing for it, and then reciting it out loud or silently where appropriate. وسمع الله لمن حمده وكل تكبيرة سنة إلا الأولى والتشهدان والجلوس لهما. Also reciting out loud where appropriate. Then سمع الله لمن حمده. In coming up from ruku' for the imam and for the person praying on their own, they say سمع الله لمن حمده. That is considered a sunnah. And Sami' Allahu liman hamida means, verily Allah has heard he who praises him. And the reason this has become a portion of the prayer is because of the barakah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Because one time he came late to the prayer, so when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said Allahu Akbar to go into the ruku', he said, Alhamdulillah. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was happy that he had not missed this ruku', that he could get into the prayer and get this ruku' before the Prophet ﷺ rises from that ruku'. So at that point, Jibreel alayhi came down to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and told him, he said, verily Allah has heard he who praises him, he who has praised him, so say, Allah hears who praises him. Sami' Allahu liman hamida. So the Prophet ﷺ had gone into ruku' saying Allahu Akbar, and previously to that, coming out of the ruku' they would say Allahu Akbar as well. But because Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when he came into the masjid and realized that he did not miss this rak'ah with the Prophet, he said Alhamdulillah, and then the Prophet ﷺ said Sami' Allahu liman hamida. Allah has heard the one who has praised him. Every takbir is a sunnah, with the exception of the first, which is an obligation. So the takbir going into ruku', going into prostration, coming out of prostration. Each one of those is a sunnah. The first and second tashahhud are also a sunnah, and then sitting for both of them are sunnahs. والجلوس لهما وتقديم الفاتحة على السورة والتسليمة الثانية والثالثة للمأموم. Also, reciting the Fatiha before the surah before the surah of the Quran is recited. If a person recites the surah and then the Fatiha, they have not fulfilled the sunnah of the prayer, so that now they should repeat the sunnah after the Fatiha. So you have to repeat the Fatiha and then the surah. A second salam for the one following an imam, and a third salam if there's a person on his left. So if a person is praying on his own, or he's the imam, he would make one taslim, he would say Assalamu alaikum, and this is according to the madhab of Imam Malik, and there are many hadiths to support this, that there would only be one salam to the right, and that would only be Assalamu alaikum without the addition of wa rahmatullah. If a person is praying behind the imam and he has somebody to his left, then after he says Assalamu alaikum, he would then say silently, without turning his head, he would say Assalamu alaikum to the imam and Assalamu alaikum to the person on his left. If there's nobody on his left, then he would not say Assalamu alaikum to the person on his left. So that second salam to the imam and the third salam to the person on his left would each be considered a sunnah. Also, reciting out loud the obligatory salam is a sunnah. So to say the obligatory salam we said is an obligation, but a person can say it with just moving their lips and their tongues. To actually vocalize it would be considered a sunnah. So to say Assalamu alaikum out loud would be a sunnah. والصلاة على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والسجود على الأنف والكفين والركبتين وأطراف القدمين والسترة لغير المأموم وأقلها غلظ رمح وطول ذراع طاهر ثابت غير مشوش. Also, benedictions, prayers upon the blessed messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is a sunnah of the prayer. Prostrating with one's nose, 2 palms, 2 knees, and toes all on the ground is also a sunnah. So prostrating, having the forehead on the ground, is considered an obligation. Having the nose, the 2 palms, and the knees, and all toes, the tips of the feet on the ground, are considered sunnah. Placing a sutra in front of the imam or anyone praying on their own is also a sunnah. So if an imam is praying, or somebody is praying on their own, and they fear that somebody or something might walk in front of them, it's sunnah for them to place a sutra in front of them. Then Imam al-Akhdari says, the conditions of this sutra, of this prayer barrier, is that the shortest that it can be is the length of the arm. Is طول ذراع. So the thickness has to be the thickness of a spear, غلظ رمح, which is about the thickness of an average man's wrist. And then the length should be at least the length of an arm, from the thumb to the elbow. طاهر, it should be pure. ثابت, it should be standing up by itself. So for example, a baseball bat would be longer than an arm, it'd be as thick as a spear, but if you can't just lay it down on the ground. It has to be standing up, either nailed to a board to where it can stand up by himself, or it's driven into the ground to where it's standing up by itself, and then it could be used as a sutra. غير مشوش, it also should be something that's not distracting, like a piece of wood that's highly decorated, so that's going to distract him in the prayer. Or using a person that's facing them as a sutra. So things that could be used as a sutra are columns in a room or in a masjid, trees, walls, and so forth. وَفَضَائِلُهَا, the virtuous acts of the prayer. رَفْعُ الْيَدَيْنِ عِنْدَ الْإِحْرَامِ حَتَّى تُقَابِلَ الْأُذْنَيْنِ. The meritorious acts of the prayer are raising the 2 hands to the level of the ears during the opening takbir. So we said that the opening takbir, to say Allahu Akbar, is an obligation. And the obligation is fulfilled if a person just says Allahu Akbar with the movement of the tongue and the lips, even if he doesn't raise his arms, and even if he doesn't vocalize it. To vocalize the Allahu Akbar, the saying of Allahu Akbar, is considered recommended. And then to raise the hands until they're at the level of the ears, and some scholars say at the level of the shoulders, that would be considered recommended. So the complete way to do the takbir would be to be facing the qibla, and according to the Maliki scholars, to have the face not looking down at the prostration, but actually looking forward towards the Qibla, and then raise the hands slowly until they reach the ears. The tips of the fingers are at the ears and the palms are at the shoulders. And then once they're facing that, they say Allahu Akbar out loud, and then they slowly drop them down. وقول المأموم والفذي ربنا ولك الحمد. Also saying ربنا ولك الحمد for the follower of an imam or an individual praying. So for those two people, the one following the imam or the individual, it is recommended for them to say ربنا ولك الحمد. For the imam, it's not recommended. What's sunnah for him to do is to say سمع الله لمن حمده, and then the followers would say ربنا ولك الحمد. The person praying on their own would say both سمع الله لمن حمده and ربنا ولك الحمد. And the follower would only say ربنا ولك الحمد. ولا يقولها الإمام إلا في قراءة السر والتأمين بعد الفاتحة للفذ والمأموم ولا يقولها الإمام إلا في قراءة السر. Also saying Ameen after the Fatiha for the one following an imam or one praying on his own. If a person's following an imam, he would say Ameen after every recitation of the Fatiha in each rak'ah. If he's praying on his own, again he would also say Ameen after every recitation of Fatiha. But the Ameen, according to the Maliki madhab, would be said, but it would be said silently. The Imam should not recite it except for those prayers recited silently. The Imam, if he's reciting silently, then he would say Ameen to himself. If he is reciting out loud in the first two rak'ahs of Maghrib or Isha or in Subh prayer, then after Fatiha, the followers would say Ameen, but he himself, the Imam, would not say Ameen. وَالتَّسْبِيحُ فِي الرُّكُوعِ وَالدُّعَاءُ فِي السُّجُودِ. Also, it's recommended to supplicate, to do tasbih during the ruku', during the bowing. The person would say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, or any formula of tasbih and any number of times. Imam Malik considered it disliked to use a specific formula and a specific number of times in the ruku' as well as in the sujood. So they would do tasbih, any form of the tasbih, saying Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subbuhun Quddus Rabbul Malaikati wal Ruh, Subhana Rabbika Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun. Any formula that has tasbih in it would be used in the bowing and used in the prostration, and any number of times. But it should at least be 3 times. Also, supplication at the time of the prostration. A person would not supplicate while bowing in ruku'. If they're going to supplicate during the prayer, they should do that during the prostration. And they can supplicate for whatever they wish, even if it's for things of the dunya. Although during the prayer, a person should not be thinking about the dunya. But if they were to make a dua for something, for them to get a benefit of a dunya matter, of a worldly matter, that would be permissible. And if they're not able to make a dua in the Arabic language, then it is permissible for them to make dua, to supplicate in their native tongue. وتطويل القراءة في الصبح والظهر تليها وتقصيرها في العصر والمغرب. Also recommended in the prayer is to recite short surahs, recite from the longer surahs during the subh and the dhuhr prayers. So if a person is praying on their own, they would recite from the longer surahs in dhuhr, and that's defined as from the surah al-Hujurat up to but not including Surah Abasa. So that's from Surah 49 in the Quran to chapter 80, which is Surah Abasa. So those are considered the longer surahs in the Quran. So if a person is praying by themselves, they would recite from those longer surahs. That would be recommended for them. And the subh should be longer than the dhuhr. So in that section from Surah 80, from Surah 49 up to but not including 80, from Surah al-Hujurat to Surah Abasa, the longer surahs would be read for subh, and the shorter of those surahs would be read for dhuhr. And this is again if he's praying on his own. Then وَتَقْصِيرُهَا فِي الْعَصْرِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ, reciting short surahs for the Asr and the Maghrib, and the short surahs are defined as from Surah to Duha to the end of the Quran, and that would be Surah 93 until the end of the Quran. وَتَوَسُّطُهَا فِي الْعِشَاءِ, reciting medium length surahs for the Isha prayer, and that would be from Surah Abasa up to but not including Duha. That would be from Surah 80 to 93. Those are the short surahs. For the medium length surahs. For the imam though, it's recommended for him at all times to recite from the shorter lengths of the surahs, because the Prophet ﷺ said that if one of he told us that if a person is going to be an imam, he should make his prayer short, fulfilling the obligations, but he should make it short, because there are people that are sick, there are people that are weak, and there are people that have needs to take care of, and so having a longer prayer might distract them. Now if a person is praying and the entire jama'ah has requested that he read a longer surah, and he knows that nobody else would come to that jama'ah, then it's permissible for him to read from those longer surahs. وتكون السورة الأولى قبل الثانية وأطول منها. Also, the first surah should be longer than the second, and it should be before it in the sequence of the Quran. So it should be, the first surah should be longer than the second, and the first surah should also come before it in the order of the Quran. وَالْهَيْئَةُ الْمَعْلُومَةُ فِي الرُّكُوعِ وَالسُّجُودِ وَالْجُلُوسِ. Also recommended is the known postures of bowing, prostration, and sitting. So we said bowing is an obligation, prostration is an obligation, and the sitting would be sunnah. But it's recommended, and as long as they fulfill the obligations of those, that's the basic, what they should fulfill. But it's recommended to do it in the best of fashions. So fulfilling the known postures of bowing, prostration, and sitting. Of bowing, it would be that his palms are on his knees, his fingers lightly spread, his knees lightly bent, his back straight, and his head level with his back. In the sujood, it would be that his hands are close to his ears or a little bit just near them. The fingers together facing the qibla, his forehead, his nose, his knees, and the tips of his toes on the ground. Also recommended is the known posture of sitting. So in the tashahhud, according to the Maliki madhab, he would do the position which is known as tawarruk, and it's that his left buttocks is on the ground. The right calf is rested upon the arch of the left foot. The right foot has the toes with the bottom of the toes touching the ground, if possible, and the toes facing the qibla. If he's not able to do that, then he would have the inside of the left foot resting on the ground. So this sitting position, and then with the hands on the thighs, with the fingers towards the knees and maybe a little bit over the knees, that is called the tawarruk sitting. It, according to the Maliki madhab, would be done in all sittings of the prayer. In the Hanafi madhab, they do the iftirash, which is sitting on having the left buttock sitting on the left foot. According to the Maliki madhab, though, that sitting style would be considered disliked or makruh. So they would do the tawarruk, the sitting posture that was described in all sittings of the prayer. Makruhatul salat, the reprehensible matters of the prayer. وَيُكْرَهُ الِالْتِفَاتِ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. The reprehensible matters of the prayer are looking sideways, looking around during the prayer if there's no reason. Whereas if there's a reason, if somebody's looking around, making sure their children are okay, making sure that there's no danger coming towards him, then that would be permissible. Also disliked, وَتَغْمِيضُ الْعَيْنَيْنِ وَالْبَسْمَلَةُ وَالتَّعَوُّذُ فِي الْفَرِيضَةِ وَيَجُوزَانِ فِي النَّفْلِ. Also disliked is closing the eyes. So during the prayer, to close the eyes would be considered makruh, unless there's a distraction, and by closing the eyes, it would allow them to concentrate. So if there are people walking in front of him, or if there are things that are haram to look at, he would close his eyes. If there are things that are haram, it would be incumbent for him to close his eyes. And if it's distracted, then it would be permissible for him to close his eyes to concentrate. Whereas if there are no distractions and there's nothing haram, then it's makruh for him to close his eyes, even if it's to concentrate, because the ulama have said that a person would actually gain more concentration in the prayer with his eyes open. وَالْبَسْمَلَةُ وَالتَّعَوُّذُ فِي الْفَرِيضَةِ. Also makruh is reciting the basmalah or the ta'awudh in the obligatory prayers. So to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim or A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan ar-Rajim in the obligatory prayers, according to the Maliki madhab, is makruh, although there is no harm in doing it during the nafilah prayers. والوقوف على رجل واحدة إلا أن يطول قيامه. Also disliked is standing on one leg or leaning on one leg unless the length of the prayer is excessively long, and by doing that leaning or lifting of one leg, it gives the person rest and allows him to complete his prayer. واقتران رجليه وجعل درهم أو غيره في فمه. Also placing the feet together is considered makruh. They should be just a middle length. They shouldn't be spread far apart from each other, and they shouldn't be touching each other. They should be just a normal width, just like a person would normally stand. And the feet during the jama'ah prayer, the feet of the people do not have to be touching each other. A person will just make sure that his shoulders are lined up with the other people, but he does not have to have his feet touching with the person next to him. وَجَعْلُ دِرْهَمٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ فِي فَمِهِ. Also placing a coin or anything in one's mouth during the prayer would be considered makruh, because this would distract him. And so something like placing the pit of a date or a piece of gum in the mouth, that would be considered makruh because it distracts him. A piece of gum would be a little bit worse, because the chewing action could actually invalidate his prayer, would invalidate his prayer, and the swallowing of the juices of that gum would invalidate his prayer, because it's as if he's eating something in the prayer. وكذلك كل ما يشوشه في جيبه أو كمه أو على ظهره. Also putting anything distracting in one's pocket, sleeve, or on one's back. So having anything in the pocket that would distract him. Keeping something in the pocket is okay if it doesn't distract him, whereas if he's going to be constantly checking it, then it would not be. Then it would be disliked. Or carrying something on his back, or anything that would distract him during the prayer. والتفكر في أمور الدنيا وكل ما يشغله عن الخشوع في الصلاة. Also contemplating worldly matters during the prayer is considered disliked. The person should be thinking more about the akhirah, the matters of death and what's after it, and thinking about what's the Jannah and the hellfire. Things that would cause him to have humbleness in his prayer. And he should not be thinking about the dunya. So to think about the dunya is makruh. The more he thinks about it, the more reward is removed from his prayer. And if he's thinking about dunya throughout his entire prayer and does not have one instant of reflection about the afterlife, or his state with Allah and his fear and his state in the grave, or the state of the grave, then if he does not have even one instant of that khushu', then his prayer is correct, but he has done a wrong matter. So to have one instant of khushu', of humble awareness in the prayer, is considered an obligation. To have it during the entire length of the prayer would complete the reward of the prayer, but if it's not there, it would not invalidate the prayer. Also, anything that detracts from one's humble experience of humble submission during the prayer is also makruh. So if there's anything that would distract him, like praying in an area where there's a lot of people around, that's going to distract him, so that would be considered makruh. Or if he's able to pray inside and he chooses to pray outside and it's raining or it's very cold, those things are going to distract him in the prayer, so it would be makruh. Or if he can pray in the shade and he decides to pray in the sun, that would be considered makruh, because he shouldn't be thinking about the heat or about the cold or about the people moving around. He should be thinking about his prayer. So the people that try to inflict bodily harm on them or increase their pain or their suffering, thinking that it's a jihad of the nafs, a struggle against the nafs, is not correct, because the condition of a struggle in the nafs, the jihad of nafs, is that it be in accordance with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And these rules that Imam al-Akhdari are mentioned are all derived directly from the Quran and the sunnah. During this text, the majority of the text, Imam al-Akhdari has focused on the outward aspects of the prayer, but the outward aspects are aspects that can be learned very quickly and attained very quickly. What's the most important thing from the prayer is the inner aspect of the prayer, making sure that he's fulfilling this inwardly. So outwardly he's fulfilling it, and then inwardly. A person cannot fulfill the inward unless he's fulfilled the outward first. But once he's fulfilled the outward, now he should focus on the inward. So it's only going to take a short time to perfect the outward, and then he's going to spend the rest of his life perfecting the inward aspect of the prayer. So this next section of Al-Akhdari is a section that this entire text should be memorized by every person that wants to know their fard ayn or begin studying their fard ayn. But a special attention should be paid to this next section. فصل للصلاة نور عظيم تشرق به قلوب المصلين ولا يناله إلا الخاشعون فإذا أتيت إلى الصلاة ففرغ قلبك من الدنيا وما فيها واشتغل بمراقبة مولاك الذي تصلي لوجهه واعتقد أن الصلاة خشوع وتواضع لله سبحانه بالقيام والركوع والسجود وإجلال وتعظيم له بالتكبير والتسبيح والذكر فحافظ على صلاتك فإنها أعظم العبادات ولا تترك الشيطان يلعب بقلبك ويشغلك عن صلاتك حتى يطمس قلبك ويحرمك من لذة أنوار الصلاة فعليك بدوام الخشوع فيها فإنها تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر بسبب الخشوع فيها فاستعن بالله إنه خير المستعان. Prayer contains a vast spiritual light that radiates in the hearts of those who truly pray, but it is only attainable by one who has humbly submitted himself. Thus, should you come to the prayer, then empty your heart of the worldly matters and what it contains, and occupy yourself with vigilant awareness of your Master, for whose sake you are praying. Firmly believe that your prayer is humility and abasement for the sake of Allah, exalted beyond description, by means of standing, bowing, and prostrating. Moreover, it is a form of reverence and magnification of Him by means of takbir, tasbih, and remembrance. Thus guard your prayer, as it is the greatest of all acts of worship. Do not allow shaitan to play with your heart or preoccupy you during your prayers to such an extent that he blinds your heart's eye and deprives you of the pleasure of the spiritual lights of the prayer. Therefore, have constant humility in it, for surely it prevents such a one from foulness and misdeeds because of that very humility in it. Seek the help of Allah, for surely He is the best of those whose help is sought. The last point that he mentioned, which is that it have constant humility in it, for surely it prevents such a one from foulness and misdeeds because of that very humility in it. So all the actions of evil and the evil and the misdeeds in the dunya can be prevented if a person is praying. If he's praying, the humbleness that is attained in the prayer would prevent him from doing evil deeds. So if a person is doing evil deeds, he should look to his prayer. If he's doing his prayer correctly, then it's the humility and the awareness that he's going to gain from that prayer that will allow him to stop doing those things. The more a person is doing those things, it means the less awareness he has in his prayer and the less humble submission he has in his prayer. Also, another ayah in the Quran says that you see the marks of the believers in their faces from the remains of the prostration, or because of the prostration. And this is not a physical mark that is seen in the face. The ulama have said that some of the ignorant people think that it's a physical mark, so they try to make a mark in their forehead by prostrating on rocks or prostrating on hard ground excessively so as to callous the skin on the forehead. The ulama have said that's the sign of ignorance to do that. If it happens without a person intending it, then there's no harm in it. But if a person intentionally tries to cause that, then that's considered a sign of the ignorant people. The sign that Allah is talking about there is humility that is gained from that. So a person, He said, Allah says that you will see the humility in their faces from, and that's the remnants of the prostration. The prostration and the prayer in holy will cause a person to have humbleness, and they will and people will see that in their faces. They will see that in their deeds. They will see it in their way they walk, in the way they talk, in the way they treat people. If they have humble submission in the prayer, Allah will give them success in having humility in all other aspects of their life. فصل للصلاة المفروضة 7 أحوال مرتبة تؤدى عليها 4 منها على الوجوب و3 على الاستحباب. This next section is talking about the forms that a prayer is to be performed in, either standing or sitting or lying down, based on a person's ability. The obligatory prayer has 7 graded forms. 4 are obligatory in their order, while 3 are desirable. So there are 7 ways that a person could perform a prayer. The first 4 that he mentions, and those are between standing or sitting, are an obligation to follow, to pray, to perform them in their order. فالتي على الوجوب أولها القيام بغير استناد ثم القيام باستناد ثم الجلوس بغير استناد ثم الجلوس باستناد. First, a person has to see if he can stand during prayer without any support. If a person can stand without any support, then he has to do that, and he can't go to the next level of praying, which is standing with support. So if a person can stand with support, he has to do so, and he cannot lean on something or lean on a stick or a wall or something. If he cannot stand without support because he is sick and he feels that it's going to cause him to get dizzy, or it's causing him great pain to stand without support, then he can stand with support. If he's not able to stand with support, then he would sit without support. Sit on the ground without support. If he cannot sit on the ground without support, then he would sit with support. So if a person is not going to pray standing, then before sitting on a chair, he would perform the prayer sitting down. فالترتيب بين هذه الأربعة على الوجوب إذا قدر على حالة منها وصلى بحالة دونها بطلت صلاته. These four forms are obligatory according to their arranged order from first to last. Should anyone able to perform one form and then perform it in another with a lower gradation, then his prayer is invalid. So, for example, if a person can stand without support and he sits to pray an obligatory prayer, his prayer is invalid. Or he can stand with support, but he chooses to sit with support, then his prayer is invalid. So he has to perform these in order. He has to try 1 before 2, 2 before 3, and 3 before 4. والثلاثة على الاستحباب هي أن يصلي العاجز على هذه الثلاثة المذكورة. The three forms which are desirable for anyone unable to sit or stand, in that case it is desirable that he follow this order. على جنبه الأيمن ثم على الأيسر ثم على ظهره. So if a person cannot stand with or without support, and he cannot sit with or without support, he's sick, so then he would pray lying down. So if he's going to pray laying down, it's recommended for him to first try praying on his right side, facing the Qibla. Then if he's not able to do that, then he would pray on his left side, facing the Qibla. Then if he's not able to do that, he would pray on his back with his feet towards the Qibla. فإن خالف في الثلاثة لم تبطل صلاته. Should he pray one as opposed to the other, his prayer remains valid. So in these three levels, it's recommended to keep them in order, meaning to try his right side before his left, then left before his back. But if he goes ahead and prays on his left before trying his right, or his back before trying his left, then he has left the recommended thing, but his prayer is correct. والاستناد الذي تبطل به صلاة القادر على تركه هو الذي يسقط بسقوطه وإن كان لا يسقط بسقوطه فهو مكروه. As for the above mentioned support that invalidates the prayer, the prayer should one able to pray otherwise do it. It is that which if the means of support was removed, he would fall down. If he would not fall due to its removal, then it is only objectionable or makruh. So this is going back to the first section where we said standing with support would invalidate the prayer if a person is able to stand without support. Or sitting with support would invalidate the prayer if he's able to sit without support. So the support that he's talking about, the above mentioned support, is that that which if the means of support was removed, he would fall down. So if a person, say, is able to stand and pray without support, and he leans on something, if he's leaning on it so much that if that thing were to be removed, he would fall down, then that would invalidate his prayer. Whereas if he's only leaning on it lightly, and if we remove that, he would maintain his balance, then leaning on that thing is makruh, but it does not invalidate his prayer. So that above mentioned condition that going from standing without support to standing with support, that it would invalidate the prayer, that's only if he's leaning so much on that thing, on that wall or on that pole, that if that were to be removed, even if we don't remove it, but if we consider that if it were to be removed, he would fall down, then his prayer is invalid by that mere leaning. Whereas if he's leaning on it lightly, and if it were to be removed, in theory, even if it doesn't be removed physically, and he's able to maintain his balance, then that leaning is makruh, and it does not invalidate his prayer. وأما النافلة فيجوز للقادر على القيام أن يصليها جالسا وله نصف أجر القائم، ويجوز أن يدخلها جالسا ويقوم بعد ذلك، أو يدخلها قائما ويجلس بعد ذلك، إلا أن يدخلها بنية القيام فيها فيمتنع جلوسه بعد ذلك. As for nafila prayers, it is permissible to perform them sitting even if one was able to stand. So this previous section we were talking about, in the beginning of this section we were talking about an obligatory prayer. It has to be performed standing if one is able. Whereas for the nafila prayer, it's permissible for them to perform it sitting even if they're able to stand. Although should one do that, the reward of his prayer is only half of that of one who prayed standing. So he would get half of the reward. If a person prayed a nafila prayer, there's a certain reward that he would get. If he chose to sit down, then he would only have half of that reward. It is also permissible to begin a prayer sitting and then stand thereafter, or to begin by standing and then sit down. But this is with the condition that he did not intend standing when he entered the prayer. In such a case, he would not be allowed to sit down after standing. So if a person goes into the nafila prayer standing in the first rak'ah, it's permissible for him to sit in the second. Or the opposite. If he went into the nafila prayer sitting, he can stand in the second. But this is with the condition that he did not intend to stand during the entire prayer. If he went into the prayer intending to perform this entire prayer standing, then he cannot sit after that, because he has now made a promise to Allah, a vow, a nadhr, to perform this standing, and now it becomes incumbent for him to perform it standing up. And so this is the idea of nadhr. If a person takes something that is normally recommended and promises to do it, then that thing now becomes incumbent for him to do. And if he does not do it, then he has to pay an expiation. In such a case, he would not be able to sit down after that, after standing, where he intended to stand the whole prayer. He could not sit, because now it's incumbent for him to complete this prayer standing. فصل في قضاء الصلاة يجب قضاء ما في الذمة من الصلوات ولا يحل التفريط فيها. It is absolutely necessary to make up any prayers that one is responsible for and has not performed. So, according to the ulama, according to the dominant opinion of the scholars of the madhabs and of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, if a person does not pray, either because he forgot to do it, or he left it intentionally or unintentionally, he has to make up that prayer, and that from the time he becomes of age until he begins praying correctly in its proper times. So he has to make up all the prayers he has missed. Any neglect in this area is absolutely not permissible. So it's not permissible to delay making up of the prayers. وَمَنْ صَلَّى كُلَّ يَوْمٍ خَمْسَةَ أَيَّامٍ فَلَيْسَ بِمُفَرِّطٍ. Anyone who performs 5 days of prayers each day until they have been completed is not considered neglectful. So we said that it's not permissible to neglect this area. If a person is performing 5 days of prayer for every day that goes by, then he is not considered neglectful. So with the Dhuhr prayer, he's praying Subuh, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. With Asr the same, and so forth. So if he had missed 5 years of prayer, he would make them up in 1 year. This is the opinion of a number of the Maliki scholars. The dominant opinion, though, is that the amount of prayers that has to be made up is relative to a person's state. So if a person is working to provide the basic necessities for himself and his families, or he's studying Fard Ain knowledge, or even he's studying Fard Kifaya knowledge, then he can do less than 5 days for every day. And if he has more, he's not working or he's not studying and he has more time, then he would do more than 5 days for every day. So it would be relative to his state, as long as he's making sure that any time that he can use to make up those prayers, he's doing so. ويقضيها على نحو ما فاتته إن كانت حضرية قضاها حضرية وإن كانت سفرية قضاها سفرية سواء كان حين القضاء في حضر أو سفر. In fulfilling what is owed, when a person is making up the missed prayers that he has, he should perform them according to their status when missed. If the prayers owing are resident, he should perform the full resident prayer. And if they are traveling prayers, he should perform them as traveling prayers, irrespective of whether he is a resident or traveler at the time of making them up. So a person looks at the status of the prayer when he missed it. If he missed it while he was traveling, then he prays it as a traveler's prayer, meaning he shortens Dhuhr, Asr and Isha and makes the 4 rak'ahs into 2 rak'ahs, even if he is not traveling at the time when he is making up those prayers. And if he has missed the prayers while as a resident, then he would pray them, the complete residence prayer. He would not shorten the 4 rak'ah prayer, even if he is traveling at the time of making them up. والترتيب بين الحاضرتين وبين يسير الفوائت مع الحاضر واجب مع الذكر واليسير 4 صلوات فأدناه. 2 current prayers owing should be performed in their respective order. So the حاضرتين, which are the Dhuhr and the Asr prayers, and then the Maghrib and the Isha prayer, these are 2 current prayers. They have to be performed in order. So if a person has not prayed Dhuhr, he should not pray Asr until he has prayed Dhuhr. If he prays Dhuhr, Asr, the second of the 2 prayers, knowing that he has not prayed the first, then that second prayer is invalid. So if he begins Asr knowing that he has not prayed Dhuhr of that day, then his prayer is invalid, his Asr is invalid. If he has began praying Isha knowing that he has not prayed Maghrib, then his Isha is invalid. So he has to pray the Maghrib before the Isha and the Dhuhr before the Asr. Also, a small amount of missed prayers with a current prayer should be prayed in their respective order of occurrence. So if a person has a small amount of missed prayers, meaning according to Imam al-Akhdari, he will mention what that amount is. If he has this small amount of missed prayers, he should make them up before praying any other prayers. ومن كانت عليه 4 صلوات فأقل صلاها قبل الحاضرة ولو خرج وقتها ويجوز القضاء في كل وقت. By small amount, we mean 4 or less. So according to what Imam al-Akhdari has mentioned here, if a person owes 4 or less prayers, 1, 2, 3, or 4 prayers, he prays them before the current prayer, even if it means that doing that will cause that current prayer's time to go out. So say for example, he has not prayed any prayers, and now it's he has missed 4 times, and now it's prayers Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, and now it's the morning time, and he wakes up and he realizes that he has not prayed 4 prayers, either the immediate past 4 prayers or 4 times in any time during his life. Now, if it means that by praying these 4 prayers he's going to lose the time of Subuh, he goes ahead and does that, and then prays Subuh after them. The other opinion, and it's mentioned by Ibn Ashir, and is the other strong opinion of the Maliki madhab, is that a small amount is 5 or less. So according to what Akhdari is saying, if a person owes 5 prayers or more, then he would pray the current prayer before making those up. And on the other opinion, 5 would actually be considered a small amount. So in any case, if a person has a small amount of prayers, they have to make them up before they pray the current prayer. And this means even if it causes that time to go out. ويجوز القضاء في كل وقت ولا يتنفل من عليه القضاء ولا يصلي الضحى ولا قيام رمضان ولا يجوز له إلا الشفع والوتر والفجر والعيدان والخسوف والاستسقاء. Making up missed prayers is permissible at any time, including times of normal prohibition. So if a person knows that he has missed prayers, even 5 prayers or 10 prayers or 2 years of prayers, he makes them up at any times, even times of normal prohibition like the setting of the sun or the rising of the sun. One who owes missed prayers should not perform any nafilah prayers. So it's haram for a person, it's prohibited for a person to pray any nafilah prayers, any extra prayers. The what are commonly referred to as the Sunnahs before Dhuhr and Asr. And according to the Malikis, those are referred to as the nafilah prayers before Dhuhr or Asr, after Dhuhr, after Maghrib and after Isha. Those prayers before and after the obligatory prayers, those are termed as nafilah prayers, and it's haram for a person to pray them because they must make up their obligations before they work on their extra acts. Before a person starts thinking about profit, he has to think about his capital. Also, it's not permissible for him to pray the mid-morning prayer, the duha, because it's considered a nafila prayer, nor the night prayers of Ramadan, nor the tarawih prayers, because the tarawih is considered a nafila, and so for the person that owes obligatory prayers, it's haram for him to be praying the tarawih. Instead, he should be praying, making up his prayers. Also, a person should realize that one obligatory prayer is better than praying from now until the Day of Judgment nafila prayers, because leaving a nafila prayer does not incur a sin, whereas leaving an obligatory prayer does incur a sin. So the reward gained by one obligatory prayer is better than 1,000,000 nafilas. So if a person is really looking for the reward, he would leave the nafila and do the obligation. Whereas if a person is doing the non-obligatory acts before he has made up the obligatory acts, then it might be because he has a nafsi, a selfish desire in that. Indeed, it is only permissible for him to pray the shafa', the witr, the fajr, raghiba, both eids, the solar eclipse, and the rain prayers. So it's permissible for him to pray the shafa' and the witr. The sunnah prayers, these are the sunnah prayers. The witr, the 2 eids, the eclipse, and the rain prayer. Those, according to the Maliki scholars, are considered sunnah prayers. All other extra prayers are termed as nafila prayers. So these sunnah prayers, the witr, and the shafa', although it's considered a nafila, because it's immediately linked to the witr prayer, it's given the hukum of the witr, which is the sunnah. So he would pray the witr, he would pray the fajr raghiba, which is higher than a nafila and less than a sunnah. He would pray both eids, the fitr and the Eid al-Adha. He would pray the solar eclipse prayer, but not the lunar, because the lunar eclipse is recommended, it's a nafila prayer. And he would pray the rain prayers or the istisqa prayer. So the sunnah prayers, a person that has obligatory prayers to be made up, he can pray the sunnah prayers, but he would not pray the nafila prayers. ويجوز لمن عليهم القضاء أن يصلوا جماعة إذا استوت صلاتهم ومن نسي عدد ما عليه من القضاء صلى عددا لا يبقى معه شك. It is also permissible to make up missed prayers in congregation and if all of those praying owe the same prayers. So if a group of people miss the same prayer, so for example, if a group of people all overslept the subh in the morning and they woke up after the sun has risen, then they can pray that prayer together because they all missed the same exact prayer. But if somebody has missed subh from today and another from subh from yesterday, they cannot pray together because it has to be the same prayer from the same exact day. And also, if they do that as a group, they would do the iqamah. And this is taken from the case where the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were coming back from a battle, and they all slept at the end of the night, and the Prophet ﷺ put Bilal to wake them up, and he slept as well. And then none of the Sahaba woke up because they were extremely exhausted from the battle until the sun was beating down on their faces. So they prayed subh as a jama'ah. They did not do adhan, and they did iqamah for it. And that's where the Prophet ﷺ said that if a person oversleeps of a prayer, that he should pray it as soon as he remembers it. If he forgets or oversleeps a prayer, he should pray it as soon as he remembers it. So from that instance, they took a number of hukms. 1, the obligation of making up missed prayers. 2, that they can pray it as a jama'ah if it's the same prayer. And also that they would not do adhan for that prayer, but they would do iqamah. Whoever forgets the exact number of prayers he owes should make up a number that removes any doubt. So if a person has a large amount of prayers that he has missed or knows that he has to make up, then he would pray until he is sure. He would just estimate, and he knows that estimate, if he prays it, he's sure that he has completed all his prayers. So if a person has not prayed any prayers at all, or he has prayed, but later on, once studying, he realizes that he has made mistakes in his prayer, and there's no opinion that supports what he does, then he now has to make up those prayers. So when doing that, he would follow all the rules mentioned in this section, and he would pray until he knows that he owes no more prayers. And this is, people should pay special attention to making up missed prayers, because the prayer is the greatest of all the obligations, and it's even greater than Hajj. They mentioned that if a person in going to Hajj will cause him to miss one of the obligations of even one of the prayer, Like they said that if in the ships in previous times, the najasa, filth was a common thing. So if a person knew that by traveling to Hajj by ship, he would have najasa on his clothes, even if it's in one of the prayer, the Hajj would be removed, the obligation of Hajj would be removed from him. So the obligation of one prayer is given precedence over the Hajj. And so that should put in our give us an idea of the grandness of this act of worship, of the prayer.